They laughed when he proposed to their daughter, but 10 years later they're begging for his money. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Marcus Johnson nervously adjusted the collar of his only brown suit as Emily's father's look of disdain cut across the dinner table like a blade. The mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's light, making the fine china and crystal glasses sparkle with an elegance that only highlighted how out of place he felt. Richard Davenport's cold blue eyes narrowed slightly as they settled on Marcus's hands, which were wrapped around the base of a water glass to hide their slight trembling. This evening should have been the pinnacle of his happiness, but instead, Marcus felt the crushing weight of judgment from the Davenport family. The small red velvet box in his pocket seemed to burn against his thigh, as Richard and Victoria, perfect examples of Boston's white elite, scrutinized his every gesture as if searching for flaws. Emily, radiant in the blue sweater he had saved months to buy her, was the only light in this opulent room where he clearly didn't belong. "So, Marcus," Richard's voice sliced through the uncomfortable silence that had settled after the maid served the first course. "Emily tells us you studied architecture at State, not Harvard or Yale." He pronounced State, with such deliberate distaste that Marcus could almost feel the word land like a slap. Before Marcus could respond, Emily interjected, "Dad, Marcus graduated top of his class and has already had his designs featured in Architectural Digest. His approach to sustainable urban housing is revolutionary." Victoria Davenport took a delicate sip of wine before adding, "How interesting. Though I do wonder if there's much demand for that sort of thing in Boston's more established neighborhoods." Her tone made it clear what she thought of that sort of thing. Marcus straightened his shoulders slightly. "Actually, Mrs. Davenport, sustainable design is becoming increasingly sought after across all demographics. My firm just secured a contract for a mixed-use development downtown." "Mixed use?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Mixed in what sense, exactly?" The loaded question hung in the air. Marcus knew exactly what Richard was insinuating. At that moment, Walter, the older black butler, entered with the soup course. As he leaned between Marcus and Richard to place a bowl of bisque, his eyes briefly met Marcus's with a flash of understanding that spoke volumes. The slight nod he gave was nearly imperceptible, but it fortified Marcus like a shot of courage. "In the sense that it combines residential, commercial, and green spaces, sir," Marcus answered smoothly. "Creating community rather than division." Richard's lips pursed as if he'd tasted something sour. He looked down at Marcus's hands as the young man reached for his soup spoon. "Your hands don't look like an architect's. They seem to know manual labor." "Dad!" Emily exclaimed, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment and anger. Marcus smiled, refusing to be baited. "I worked construction through college, Mr. Davenport. I believe understanding how buildings are actually constructed makes me a better architect." Victoria's eyes darted between her husband and her daughter. "Emily mentioned you grew up in Roxbury. That must have been challenging." The way she said Roxbury, with that mixture of pity and disdain, made Marcus's jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. Throughout the appetizer and main course, the conversation continued in this vein, seemingly innocent questions loaded with prejudice, thinly veiled comments about his background, his education, his prospects. Through it all, Emily defended him passionately, her hand occasionally finding his under the table, squeezing reassuringly. Marcus could see the pain in her eyes each time her parents made another cutting remark, and it strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about their future together. As Walter cleared the dinner plates and brought in a delicate lemon soufflé for dessert, Marcus discreetly touched the small velvet box in his pocket. Despite everything, this was still the night he had planned for. Taking a deep breath, He waited until Walter had retreated from the room before speaking. "Mr. and Mrs. Davenport," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "I know we come from different worlds, and I understand your concerns about Emily's future. But I love your daughter more than anything. She's not just the woman I want to spend my life with. She's the person who makes me want to be better, to build a better world." Emily's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Marcus turned to her, taking her hand. "Emily, you've brought light and purpose into my life. Every design I create, every building I imagine is shaped by the vision of our future together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small red velvet box, opening it to reveal a modest but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, the room was perfectly still. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the ring, then at Marcus's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will." Before she could take the ring, a sharp laugh cut through the air. Richard Davenport was shaking his head, an incredulous smile on his face. "You can't be serious," he said. "This is what this dinner was about? You thought you could come into our home, eat our food, and then just help yourself to our daughter?" He looked directly at Marcus. "Let me be clear, young man. I see exactly what you're doing. An ambitious architect from Roxbury suddenly interested in the daughter of one of Boston's most connected developers. Please, you're an opportunist, plain and simple." "Richard," Victoria gasped, though whether in shock at his bluntness or his daughter's engagement wasn't clear. Emily stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled backward. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Marcus is the most talented, hard-working, honest person I've ever known. He doesn't care about your connections or your money. He loves me for who I am, not for my last name. Something you might want to try sometime." Victoria reached for her daughter's arm. "Emily, darling, be reasonable. It's not that we don't think Marcus is accomplished, but there are cultural differences that can't be ignored. We're just concerned about your happiness in the long term." "Cultural differences?" Emily repeated incredulously. "Just say what you really mean, Mom. You're worried about what your friends at the country club will say if your daughter marries a black man." A heavy silence fell across the table. Marcus remained seated, the open ring box still in his hand, acutely aware of Walter standing perfectly still near the serving table, his face a careful mask of professional detachment that didn't quite hide the pain in his eyes. Richard slowly stood up, his face darkening with anger. He reached for his wine glass, and in a movement that appeared deliberate, despite his attempt to make it seem accidental, knocked it over. The deep red Cabernet spread across the white tablecloth and cascaded directly onto Marcus's lap, staining his only good suit. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Richard said coldly. "It seems we've had enough excitement for one evening. I think it's time for you to leave my house." Marcus stood up, wine dripping from his pants, the velvet box now closed in his fist. "Mr. Davenport, I came here tonight out of respect for you and Mrs. Davenport, and out of love for your daughter. I didn't come looking for your approval or your connections. I came because Emily matters to me, and you matter to her." He looked Richard directly in the eye. "But that respect has to be earned on both sides. Are you lecturing me in my own home?" Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "Let me make something perfectly clear. My daughter deserves someone from her own world, someone who understands her background and can provide her with the life she's accustomed to, not someone who's clearly trying to climb the social ladder." "Dad, stop it," Emily cried. Marcus remained steady. "I may not have been born into wealth, Mr. Davenport, but I've never had to compromise my integrity to get what I want. Can you say the same?" Richard's face flushed with rage. "Get out of my house, now." Emily grabbed Marcus's hand. "If he's leaving, I'm going with him." She turned to her mother, whose face had gone pale. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I won't stay where the man I love isn't welcome." Victoria stood up, reaching for her daughter. "Emily, don't be foolish. You're upset now, but tomorrow I'll still be in love with Marcus, Emily finished firmly, and you'll still have to decide if your prejudice is worth losing your daughter over. Without waiting for a response, Emily rushed upstairs, leaving Marcus standing awkwardly in the dining room with her parents. 5 minutes later, she returned with a small suitcase and the framed photograph of her late grandmother. She was the only one who would have approved, Emily said quietly, looking at the photograph. The only one who judged people by their character, not their color or their bank account. As they walked toward the front door, Walter appeared with Marcus's coat. As he helped him into it, the older man whispered quickly, "Be good to her, and don't let them break you." Emily kissed her mother's cheek stiffly, ignoring her father completely. And then they were outside in the cool Boston evening, walking down the long driveway to where Marcus had parked his second-hand sedan. As they approached the car, Emily gasped. In the dim glow of the security lights, they could see that someone had vandalized Marcus's car while they were inside. Scratched deeply into the paint of the driver's side door was a single word: inferior. Marcus stared at the word inferior scratched into his car door, the crude letters glinting under the security lights of the Davenport mansion. He felt Emily's hand tighten around his, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the ugliness of the act hanging between them like a physical presence. "Let's go," Emily finally whispered, her voice tight with anger and hurt. "Let's just go home." 5 years later, Marcus woke with a start, his heart hammering against his ribs. In his dream, he had been standing in that driveway again, watching as invisible hands carved hateful words into more than just his car, into his skin, his future, his very sense of self. He sat up, running a hand over his face, feeling the lingering anxiety of the nightmare slowly recede. "The dream again?" Emily's voice came softly from beside him, her hand finding his shoulder in the dim, pre-dawn light of their bedroom. Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. 5 years, and it still feels like yesterday sometimes. Emily sat up beside him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and resting her chin against him. "But it wasn't yesterday. Look at everything we've built since then." He turned to look at her, taking in the familiar warmth of her eyes, the slight crease between her brows that appeared whenever she was concerned. She was right. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of that night. Not just a relationship, but a life. Their apartment, though small, had become a sanctuary over the years. Marcus glanced around their bedroom, at the bookshelf crammed with architectural volumes and Emily's literary theory texts, at the potted plants thriving on every available surface, at the framed photograph of Emily's grandmother watching over them from the dresser. It wasn't grand like the Davenport mansion, but it was theirs, filled with love and purpose. Later that morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, Emily sat at their small table, surrounded by stacks of student essays, a red pen tucked behind her ear as she worked. Her position as an assistant professor of English literature at the community college had been hard-won, but she thrived in academia, her passion for teaching evident in the careful notes she wrote in the margins of each paper. Across from her, Marcus hunched over his drafting table, really just a door laid across 2 filing cabinets, putting the finishing touches on his latest design. The sustainable urban housing project had consumed him for months, its innovative approach to community spaces and environmental integration, representing everything he believed architecture could accomplish. "I think this is it," he murmured, more to himself than to Emily. "The final revisions for the Horizon Green project." Emily looked up, her face brightening. "Really? Let me see." As she moved to stand behind him, the phone rang. Marcus reached for it absently, his eyes still on his drawings. "Hello?" Emily watched as his expression shifted from concentration to shock to joy, his free hand reaching for hers as he listened to the voice on the other end. Yes, of course," he said. his voice carefully controlled, despite the excitement in his eyes. Tomorrow at 3 would be perfect. Thank you. When he hung up, he turned to Emily with a grin that made him look boyish, despite the hints of gray beginning to appear at his temples. The adoption agency, he said, his voice barely containing his excitement. A baby boy, 6 months old. They want us to meet him tomorrow. Emily's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. After all this time? Really? Marcus nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. Really. His name is Noah. That afternoon, Marcus walked into the mid-sized architectural firm where he had worked for the past 4 years, nodding to colleagues as he made his way to his desk. Unlike the prestigious firms that populated downtown Boston, Anderson and Pike occupied a modest office space in a converted textile factory. What they lacked in glamour, they made up for in vision and integrity, values that had drawn Marcus to them after several frustrating years at larger companies, where his ideas about sustainable, community-focused design had been repeatedly sidelined. Johnson. The voice of Tom Pike, the firm's co-founder, boomed across the open office space. Got a minute? In Tom's office, Marcus found not just his boss, but the entire senior team gathered around the conference table, all eyes on the Horizon Green scale model positioned in the center. We've got news, Tom said, his usually serious face breaking into a rare smile. Davenport Enterprises has expressed serious interest in the Horizon Green project. Marcus felt a curious mixture of pride and unease at the name. Davenport Enterprises? The development corporation? One and the same, Tom confirmed. One of the biggest players in New England real estate development. They're looking to diversify their portfolio with more sustainable projects, and yours caught their attention at the expo last month. Marcus nodded slowly, turning the information over in his mind. It was a tremendous opportunity. Davenport Enterprises had the resources to bring Horizon Green to life exactly as he had envisioned it, without the compromises smaller developers might demand. Yet the name itself stirred uncomfortable memories. They've requested a formal presentation next week, Tom continued. This could be the break we've been waiting for, Marcus. Your design could change how sustainable housing is approached in this city. Back at home that evening, Marcus and Emily celebrated in a small neighborhood restaurant, a family-owned Italian place that had become their special occasion spot over the years. As Emily twirled pasta around her fork, her eyes shining with excitement about Noah, Marcus debated whether to mention the Davenport connection. There's something else, he finally said, setting down his glass of wine. The firm that's interested in the Horizon Green project, it's Davenport Enterprises. Emily's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Davenport, as in... I don't know if it's related to your family, Marcus said quickly. It's a big corporation. Could be a coincidence. Emily set her fork down slowly. There's no coincidence. Davenport Enterprises is my father's company. He built it from the ground up. It's his life's work. She looked up at Marcus, her expression unreadable. Have you tried calling my parents at all these past 5 years? The question caught him off guard. No, I thought that was your decision to make. Emily nodded, pushing her plate slightly away. I tried, last Christmas, and the Christmas before that. The year before that, I sent cards that came back unopened. Eventually, I stopped getting their answering machine and started getting their secretary instead. The Davenports are not available. The pain in her voice made Marcus reach across the table for her hand. 5 years had dulled many wounds, but some cuts went too deep to ever fully heal. Later that night, as Emily slept beside him, Marcus sat at his laptop, staring at the Davenport Enterprises website. The company logo, a stylized D with a horizon line through it, topped a homepage showcasing luxury developments across New England. There, in the leadership section, was a photograph of Richard Davenport, looking older but just as imposing as Marcus remembered, his silver hair and confident smile projecting success and authority. Marcus clicked through to the About Us page, scanning the corporate history. His suspicions were confirmed when he read that Richard Davenport had founded the company 30 years ago, building it into one of the region's most successful real estate development corporations. This wasn't just any potential client. This was Emily's father, the man who had looked at him with contempt across a dinner table 5 years ago, the man who had called him an opportunist. Now, by some twist of fate, that same man might be about to fund Marcus's vision, without even knowing whose vision it was. Marcus had been using his middle name Alexander professionally for years, signing all his work as Alexander Johnson. It had been a practical decision initially, a way to sound more established in a field where perception mattered, but now it offered an unexpected layer of anonymity. The irony wasn't lost on him. After all, Richard's accusations about Marcus being an opportunist seeking to use the Davenport name for advancement, it was Richard who might inadvertently advance Marcus's career. As dawn approached, Marcus finally closed his laptop and returned to bed, slipping in beside Emily. She stirred slightly, moving closer to him in her sleep. Tomorrow they would meet Noah, the child who might soon become their son. Tomorrow life would change in ways they had dreamed of for years. The Davenport complication could wait. The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the orphanage, Marcus watched Emily fuss with her hair and change her outfit 3 times, her nervous energy filling their small apartment. "What if he doesn't like us?" she asked, smoothing her skirt for the 10th time. "What if we're not what the agency is looking for?" Marcus took her hands in his, steadying her. "Emily, we've been through every evaluation, every home study, every background check. We're as ready as we'll ever be." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right. This is happening. We're finally going to be parents." Marcus smiled, kissing her forehead. "Let's go meet our son." The sunlight was just beginning to fade when they returned home, both quiet but content, the visit with Noah having exceeded all their expectations. The baby boy had captivated them immediately with his large dark eyes and curious expression. When he had reached for Emily's finger, wrapping his tiny hand around it, Marcus had seen his wife fall completely in love in that instant. "He's perfect," Emily murmured, as they stood together on their small balcony, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "I can't believe he might really be ours." Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The social worker seemed positive. "I think we made a good impression." "When do you present to Davenport Enterprises?" Emily asked softly, changing the subject. "Next Thursday," Marcus replied. "I'll be using Monsieur Alexander Johnson on all the documents. There's no reason your father would make the connection." Emily turned in his arms to face him. "Are you sure you want to go through with it? Working with my father even if he doesn't know it's you?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Horizon Green is important. It's the kind of project that could change how people think about urban housing. If Davenport Enterprises can make it happen exactly as I've designed it, then yes, I want to go through with it. Emily nodded, leaning forward to rest her head against his chest. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "No matter what happens with the project or with my family, I want you to know that." As they stood embracing on the balcony, Emily's phone chimed with a new message. She pulled it from her pocket, glancing at the screen. Her body suddenly went rigid in Marcus's arms. "Emily? What is it?" Wordlessly, she held up the phone for him to see. The message was from an unknown number, the words chilling in their directness. "We know about the baby. Stay away from the project or suffer the consequences." Marcus stared at the message on Emily's phone, reading it 3 times to make sure he hadn't misunderstood. Emily's hand trembled as she took the phone back, her face pale in the fading evening light. "Who would send this?" she whispered. "How could anyone know about Noah? We've only just met him ourselves." Marcus guided her back inside the apartment, closing the balcony door behind them, as if to physically shut out the threat. "Let me see it again," he said, his mind racing through possibilities. Emily handed him the phone, wrapping her arms around herself. "Should we call the police?" Marcus studied the message, noting the unknown number. "And tell them what? That we received a vague text? They'd take a report and do nothing." He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, thinking, "This has to be connected to the Davenport Enterprises deal. But how would anyone connect that to our adoption plans? We've told hardly anyone about Noah." Marcus set the phone down on their kitchen counter. "The adoption agency, the home study, there are documents, records. Someone with enough resources could access that information." Emily sank into a chair, the implications washing over her. "You think my father is behind this?" Marcus hesitated. There was no concrete evidence, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "I don't know. But I'm not giving up the project, and I'm definitely not giving up Noah." The next morning, Marcus arrived early at the architectural firm, determined to make a subtle but important change to his presentation documents. In his office, he carefully reviewed every slide, every blueprint, every document that would be presented to Davenport Enterprises, ensuring that only M.S. Alexander Johnson appeared as the architect's name. Tom Pike appeared in the doorway as Marcus was finalizing the changes. "Getting ready for the big presentation?" Marcus nodded, closing the file on his computer. "Just making some final adjustments." "Smart move using your middle name professionally," Tom commented, leaning against the doorframe. "M. Alexander Johnson sounds like someone who designs buildings for royalty. Marcus Johnson sounds like the guy who delivers their pizza." He grinned to show he was joking. Marcus forced a smile. If only Tom knew the real reason for the name change now. Something like that. Across town at Emerson College, Emily stood before her freshman literature class, discussing the symbolism in Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. Despite her professional demeanor, her eyes kept darting to the classroom door and windows, scanning for unfamiliar faces. Near the end of her lecture, she spotted him, a man in a dark suit standing just outside the classroom door, watching her through the small window. He wasn't one of her colleagues or any administrator she recognized. When their eyes met briefly, he didn't look away or appear embarrassed at being caught staring. Instead, he held her gaze for an uncomfortable moment before turning and walking away. Emily stumbled over her words mid-sentence, the threat from last night suddenly feeling very real. She managed to finish the class, but her hands shook as she gathered her materials afterward. In the faculty lounge, she tried calling Marcus but got his voicemail. "I think someone's watching me at the college," she whispered into the phone. "Call me back as soon as you can." Meanwhile, at his office, Marcus was interrupted by his desk phone ringing. He picked it up, expecting it to be Emily. "M.S. Alexander Johnson," he answered professionally. There was silence for a moment, then a low, distorted voice spoke. "Desist from the Horizon Green project." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Who is this?" The line went dead. Marcus sat motionless, the receiver still in his hand. The threat was no longer abstract. It had found him at work, in his professional sanctuary. Slowly, he placed the phone back in its cradle and reached for his cell phone to call Emily, only to find he had missed her call while on the threatening landline call. That evening, Marcus and Emily implemented new security measures in their apartment. A locksmith installed additional deadbolts on their door, while Marcus examined windows and entry points. "We should get an alarm system," Emily suggested, watching as Marcus tested the new locks. "Already ahead of you," he replied, showing her a brochure for a home security company. "They can install it tomorrow." As they sat together on their couch later, Emily leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder. "I keep thinking about 5 years ago," she said quietly, "when I tried to call my mother a week after we left." Marcus put his arm around her, pulling her closer. "You never told me what she said." Emily's eyes grew distant with the memory. She didn't cry or yell. Her voice was so cold, like she was talking to a stranger. She said I had made my choice and would have to live with the consequences. Emily swallowed hard. She told me not to call again until I had come to my senses. Marcus felt a familiar mix of anger and sadness at how thoroughly the Davenports had rejected their daughter for choosing him. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I know how much that hurt you." "Do you think they'll ever change?" Emily asked, her voice small. Marcus thought about the threatening message, the phone call. If his suspicions were correct, the Davenports hadn't changed at all. They'd only become more desperate to interfere. "I don't know," he answered honestly. In the elegant study of the Davenport mansion, Richard Davenport sat behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by papers and financial reports. The past 5 years had not been kind to him. His hair had thinned and gone completely gray. Deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. He looked less like the commanding figure Marcus remembered and more like a man under siege. He pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to stave off a headache as he studied the latest financial projections for Davenport Enterprises. The numbers told a story he was reluctant to accept: declining profits, risky investments that hadn't paid off, mounting debt carefully hidden from public view. A soft knock at the door interrupted his grim contemplation. Victoria Davenport entered, elegant as always, in a tailored dress, though her face too showed the passage of difficult years. "It's late, Richard," she said. "You should get some rest." Richard gestured dismissively at the papers before him. "How can I rest when everything is falling apart? The Horizon Green project may be our last chance to turn things around." Victoria moved to stand behind him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. "Then make sure nothing interferes with it. Who is this architect they're so excited about?" "Some up-and-comer named Johnson. M. Alexander Johnson." Richard shuffled through some papers until he found the proposal summary. "His designs are impressive. I'll give him that." Victoria stiffened slightly at the name, but Richard, focused on the documents, didn't notice. "When is the presentation?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Thursday next week," Richard replied. "The board is already leaning toward approval, assuming the full presentation holds up." After Victoria left, Richard returned to his financial concerns, unaware that his wife had slipped away to a small room at the far end of the mansion's east wing. This space, originally intended as a reading room, had become Victoria's private sanctuary over the years. She closed the door behind her and moved to a cabinet built into the wall. From it, she withdrew a large portfolio and carried it to a small table. Opening it revealed dozens of magazine clippings, newspaper articles, and printed web pages, all featuring architectural projects by M. Alexander Johnson. Victoria ran her fingers over a photograph of a community center that had won a regional design award. The caption identified the architect, but there was no accompanying photo of the man himself. She had been collecting these articles for nearly 3 years, ever since a design journal had featured an innovative low-income housing project that caught her attention. There was something about the designs that spoke to her, a humanity and thoughtfulness that transcended mere buildings. She had never told Richard about her collection or her admiration for this unknown architect's work. The next morning, Marcus found all 4 tires of his car slashed in the office parking garage. He stood beside the vehicle, staring at the deliberate damage, a cold anger replacing his initial shock. This was no random vandalism. This was a message. Security cameras in the garage had malfunctioned during the night, according to the apologetic building manager. Marcus arranged for a tow truck and called Emily to warn her to be extra vigilant. Later that day, during her afternoon seminar, Emily again spotted the man in the dark suit, this time standing at the back of the lecture hall, making no attempt to blend in with the students. His presence was a deliberate intimidation tactic, and Emily felt her patience snap. When the class ended, instead of allowing herself to be frightened, she marched directly up to him as students filtered out of the room. "Who are you and why are you following me?" she demanded, loud enough that several departing students turned to look. The man's eyes widened slightly, apparently surprised by her direct confrontation. Without a word, he turned and quickly walked away, pushing past students to reach the exit. Emily followed him into the hallway, determined to get answers, but when she pushed through the doors, he was already jogging down the stairs at the end of the corridor. By the time she reached the building's entrance, he had disappeared. At the orphanage, the mood shifted from tense to joyful as Marcus and Emily spent time with baby Noah. The social worker observed them interacting with the infant, making notes on her clipboard as Noah gurgled happily in Emily's arms. "He clearly responds well to both of you," the social worker commented with a smile. "That's a very good sign." Marcus watched Emily gently rocking Noah, singing softly to him. Despite the threats and intimidation, this moment felt right. This was the family they were meant to build together. "We're proceeding with your application," the social worker continued. "Barring any unforeseen issues, Noah could be placed with you within the next month or two." Emily looked up at Marcus, her eyes shining with tears of joy. This was what mattered. Not the threats, not the Davenports, not even the Horizon Green project. This was their future. Back at their apartment, Emily and Marcus decided they wouldn't be intimidated any longer. "We're not giving up the project or Noah," Marcus stated firmly. "Whoever is behind these threats needs to understand that." Emily nodded, a new resolve in her expression. "We've been through worse and survived. We can handle this too." As they prepared for bed, Marcus received an email on his phone. He opened it, expecting more work correspondence, but froze when he saw it was from someone identified only as W. "Be careful tomorrow," the message read. "Richard doesn't know who you are, but someone in the room will be on your side." Marcus stared at the mysterious email on his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. W, who could that be? The cryptic message suggested someone knew his true identity and the connection to Richard Davenport, yet was apparently on his side. He reread the words, "Richard doesn't know who you are, but someone in the room will be on your side." The following morning, Marcus stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie with meticulous precision. He had chosen his best suit, charcoal gray, not brown, for the presentation at Davenport Enterprises. Each movement was deliberate as he straightened his collar, checked his cufflinks, and smoothed non-existent wrinkles from his lapels. "You've been staring at that email all night," Emily said from the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Any idea who W might be?" Marcus exhaled slowly, meeting her eyes in the mirror's reflection. "At first I thought it might be Walter, your parents' old butler. But that seems unlikely after all these years." Emily crossed the room to stand beside him, helping adjust his tie, though it needed no adjustment. "Whoever it is knows you're presenting to my father today, and they know our history." Turning to face her, Marcus took both her hands in his. "I'll be careful. The presentation is solid, the design is impeccable. If Davenport Enterprises rejects it, they'll be making a business mistake, not a personal one." Emily's lips curved into a small smile. "Go show them what brilliance looks like." The headquarters of Davenport Enterprises occupied a gleaming glass tower in downtown Boston, its distinctive D logo visible from blocks away. Marcus stepped through the revolving doors into the marble-floored lobby, immediately absorbing the atmosphere of power and wealth that permeated the building. A sleek reception desk stretched across the lobby, behind which sat a professionally polished young woman. "Monsieur Alexander Johnson," Marcus stated, his voice steady. "I have a presentation scheduled with the executive board." While waiting for his escort, Marcus studied the photographs lining the walls, Richard Davenport shaking hands with the mayor, cutting ribbons at property developments, standing alongside celebrities at charity galas. In each image, Richard looked commanding, successful, the very picture of Boston's elite. "Mr. Johnson," a crisp voice interrupted his observations. "I'm Jennifer Reeves, Mr. Davenport's executive assistant. The board is assembling now. Please follow me." The elevator ascended smoothly to the top floor, where Jennifer led Marcus through a series of hallways to a set of imposing double doors. "They're expecting you," she said, pushing one door open. The boardroom was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Boston Harbor, while a massive mahogany table dominated the center of the room. 8 people were already seated, their attention turning to Marcus as he entered. He recognized several faces from his research: board members, executives, the chief financial officer. But Richard Davenport was noticeably absent. Marcus began setting up his presentation materials, connecting his laptop to the projection system. Just as he finished, the boardroom doors swung open again, and Richard Davenport strode in. 5 years had changed him. His once dark hair was now silver gray, and lines of stress marked his face, but his bearing remained imperious as he took his seat at the head of the table. Richard barely glanced at Marcus, apparently viewing him as just another architect pitching just another project. "Let's get started," Richard announced, checking his watch impatiently. "Mr. Johnson, you have 30 minutes to convince us that your Horizon Green project deserves Davenport Enterprises' backing." With a calm nod, Marcus launched into his presentation. His voice grew stronger as he spoke about the vision behind Horizon Green: sustainable urban living spaces that fostered community while respecting the environment. The 3D renderings drew murmurs of appreciation from the board members as Marcus explained innovative water recycling systems, community gardens, and energy-efficient design elements. "What makes Horizon Green unique," Marcus continued, "is its integration of social sustainability with environmental innovation. This isn't just about creating green buildings, it's about creating green communities." Throughout his presentation, Marcus was acutely aware of Richard's gaze gradually shifting from disinterested to focused. The older man leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as Marcus described the economic benefits of the project. When Marcus finished the formal presentation, several board members immediately began asking technical questions, which he answered with confidence and expertise. The energy in the room had shifted. What had begun as polite interest had transformed into genuine excitement. Then Richard Davenport cleared his throat, silencing the room. "Mr. Johnson, your design is certainly idealistic, but idealism rarely survives contact with reality." His eyes had not left Marcus's face for several minutes now, a puzzled expression gradually forming. "Have we met before? You seem familiar." Marcus maintained his composure, though his heart rate accelerated. "I don't believe so, Mr. Davenport. I would remember meeting someone of your stature in the industry." Richard's eyes narrowed further. "Where did you study architecture, Mr. Johnson?" "State University," Marcus answered honestly. A flash of recognition crossed Richard's face, followed by a darkening of his expression. "State University, not Harvard or Yale." The words echoed those from that dinner 5 years ago, and Marcus knew with certainty that Richard had made the connection. Richard stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "Mr. Johnson, or should I say Mr. Marcus Johnson, perhaps you'd like to explain to the board why you felt it necessary to disguise your identity when approaching Davenport Enterprises?" The boardroom fell silent, confusion evident on the faces of the other executives. Marcus straightened to his full height, refusing to be intimidated. "I've never disguised my identity, Mr. Davenport. I've been professionally known as Ems Alexander Johnson for years. My middle name is Alexander. It's on all my professional credentials and previous projects." Richard's laugh was cold. "A convenient explanation. What you failed to mention is that you're the man who attempted to marry into my family for advancement, who disappeared with my daughter 5 years ago." One of the female board members gasped softly. Another executive exchanged a bewildered glance with his colleague. "With all due respect, Mr. Davenport," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "I came here today to present an architectural project, not to discuss personal matters. If you'd like to evaluate Horizon Green on its merits, I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're more interested in rehashing mischaracterizations from the past, perhaps this isn't the appropriate forum." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You have some nerve." "The project looks financially sound," interrupted an older board member, clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn. "The sustainability aspects would position Davenport Enterprises favorably with the City Planning Commission." "I agree," added another executive. "The return projections are conservative but solid, and the press would love the green angle." Richard turned to his board members, incredulous. "You can't seriously be considering working with this man?" "The question before us," said the chief financial officer firmly, "is whether Horizon Green is a viable project for Davenport Enterprises, not the architect's personal life." For the next 20 minutes, Richard attempted to undermine Marcus's design, questioning everything from material costs to environmental impact studies. With each attack, Marcus responded with detailed knowledge and reasoned explanations, never losing his professional demeanor despite Richard's increasingly personal jabs. "Your low-income housing component will attract the wrong element to the development," Richard argued, desperation creeping into his voice. Marcus's response was measured but passionate. "Research consistently shows that mixed-income developments create more stable, vibrant communities. Horizon Green isn't about separating people based on income levels. It's about bringing them together in spaces designed for interaction and mutual support." "That sounds like social engineering, not architecture," Richard scoffed. "All architecture is social engineering, Mr. Davenport," Marcus countered. "The question is whether we engineer division or connection. I choose connection." The CFO nodded appreciatively at this response, as did several other board members. Marcus could feel the room shifting further in his favor with each exchange. Finally, the senior board member called for a vote. "All those in favor of moving forward with the Horizon Green project, pending final financial review?" Every hand except Richard's rose into the air. The vote was nearly unanimous. Richard Davenport's face contorted with barely controlled rage. Without another word, he gathered his papers and stormed out of the boardroom, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. "Well, Mr. Johnson," the senior board member said after a moment, "it appears we have a project to discuss. Our legal team will be in touch regarding next steps." As the board members filed out, offering congratulatory handshakes to Marcus, he noticed a woman standing in the doorway who hadn't been present during the presentation. Though older than he remembered, he instantly recognized Victoria Davenport, watching him with an inscrutable expression. When the room had emptied, Victoria stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You've done well for yourself, Marcus," she said quietly. "Mrs. Davenport," Marcus acknowledged cautiously. "This is unexpected." Victoria moved closer, her eyes studying his face. "I've been following your work for some time now. The community center in Dorchester, the mixed-use development in Cambridge." She smiled faintly at his surprised expression. "Yes, I've kept track. Your designs have heart, something Davenport projects have always lacked." Before Marcus could respond, Victoria continued, "Richard doesn't know I'm here. He doesn't know I've been collecting articles about your work for years. I'd appreciate if you kept it that way." With that cryptic statement, she turned to leave, pausing at the door. "How is Emily?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "She's well," Marcus answered. She's teaching literature at Emerson College. We're happy. Victoria nodded once, her eyes briefly revealing a deep sadness before her composed mask returned. Then she was gone, leaving Marcus, alone in the boardroom, trying to process what had just happened. As Marcus gathered his materials and headed toward the elevator, a security guard approached him, an older black man with a dignified bearing despite his uniform. With a jolt of recognition, Marcus realized it was Walter, the Davenport's former butler. Walter discreetly slipped a business card into Marcus's hand. "Congratulations on the presentation," he said formally, before adding in a lower voice, "We need to talk. The Davenport empire is failing, and your project is more important than you realize." Marcus stared at Walter's business card, turning it over in his hands as the elevator descended to the lobby of Davenport Enterprises. The card was simple but elegant. Walter Simmons, financial consultant, with a phone number and email address. The former butler's words echoed in his mind. The Davenport empire is failing, and your project is more important than you realize. The following afternoon, Marcus sat at a corner table in a quiet cafe several blocks from the Davenport building. He had arrived 15 minutes early, scanning every patron as they entered, still uncertain if this meeting was a trap or a genuine offer of help. At precisely 2 o'clock, Walter walked in, no longer in his security uniform, but dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that spoke of considerable means. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Johnson," Walter said, extending his hand as he approached the table. His voice carried the same dignified tone Marcus remembered from 5 years ago, but there was a new confidence in his bearing. Marcus shook the offered hand firmly. "I have to admit, I'm curious about how the Davenport's butler became a financial consultant with inside knowledge of their business affairs." Walter smiled slightly as he took the seat across from Marcus. "I was never just a butler, Mr. Johnson. I have an MBA from Wharton that the Davenports never bothered to discover. While serving their drinks and managing their household, I was also managing my own investment portfolio." "And now?" Marcus prompted, intrigued by this revelation. "I left the Davenport household 4 years ago when my investments reached a point where I no longer needed employment." Walter's expression grew serious. "But I've maintained connections within the company. Richard Davenport has made a series of catastrophic financial decisions in recent years. Failed investments, overextended credit lines, possibly even some creative accounting that borders on fraud." Marcus leaned forward, processing this information. "And my project? How does Horizon Green factor into this?" Walter signaled for coffee before continuing. "Davenport Enterprises needs a success story. Something innovative that will attract positive press and new investors. Your project could be that story, but Richard's personal vendetta against you might override his business sense." "You said you'd be willing to finance the project," Marcus said, remembering Walter's earlier offer. "Are you serious about that?" Walter nodded, reaching into his briefcase to withdraw a folder of documents. "Entirely serious. I've created a holding company that could partner with your architectural firm as the primary investor. Richard Davenport would never need to know I'm involved." As Marcus began reviewing the documents, Walter added quietly, "I was in that house for 27 years, Mr. Johnson. I watched Emily grow up. I saw what happened that night when you proposed. This isn't just business for me. It's about setting something right." Across town, Emily sat on the edge of their bed, one hand pressed against her forehead as a wave of dizziness passed through her. The past few days had taken their toll. The threatening messages, the stalker at the college, the stress of Marcus's presentation to her father. She reached for her phone to call Marcus, but hesitated as another spell of nausea washed over her. When the phone rang in her hand, she jumped, nearly dropping it. The caller ID showed the adoption agency's number. Forcing herself to take a deep breath, Emily answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Sandra Hayes from Hope Adoption Services." The social worker's tone immediately set Emily on edge. "I'm afraid we've encountered some irregularities with your application for NOAA." Emily's heart sank. "What kind of irregularities? All our paperwork was in order." "That's just it," Sandra replied, hesitation evident in her voice. "Some of your documentation appears to have been questioned. Anonymous concerns have been raised about the stability of your home environment." "Anonymous concerns?" Emily repeated, anger beginning to replace her anxiety. "What does that even mean?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but we're legally obligated to investigate any claims that might affect a child's well-being." Sandra's voice softened slightly. "I want you to know that personally, I believe these concerns are unfounded, but protocol requires us to put the process on hold until our investigation is complete." After ending the call, Emily sat motionless, trying to process what had happened. Someone was deliberately sabotaging their adoption of Noah, and she had little doubt who was behind it. The realization that her parents would stoop this low to control her life brought both fury and heartbreak. When Marcus returned home that evening, he found Emily researching stress symptoms on her laptop, surrounded by printouts about anxiety disorders. "The doctor confirmed it's stress," she said before he could ask, closing the laptop. "My blood pressure is elevated and I've been having panic attacks. He prescribed some anti-anxiety medication and suggested I take a leave of absence from teaching." Marcus knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Why didn't you call me? I would have gone to the doctor with you." "You had your meeting with Walter," she replied, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, I needed to handle this myself. I can't fall apart every time my parents try to control our lives." The mention of her parents provided the opening for her to share the call from the adoption agency. As she explained the anonymous concerns that had been raised, Marcus's expression hardened. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "First threats, then stalking, now trying to take Noah away from us. We need to fight back." Emily nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Walter showed you proof that my father hired investigators to follow me?" "Not just investigators," Marcus confirmed, reaching into his bag for the folder Walter had given him. "He has financial records showing payments to a private security firm that specializes in corporate espionage and intimidation." Spreading the documents on their small dining table, Marcus began analyzing the patterns. "These payments began exactly 1 week after Davenport Enterprises expressed interest in Horizon Green." Emily leaned over his shoulder, studying the evidence. "But if my father is behind the threats, why did the intimidation continue after your presentation? The board approved the project despite his objections." "That's what doesn't add up," Marcus agreed, tapping a specific document. "These payments continued after the board meeting, and according to Walter, Richard seemed genuinely shocked when I mentioned the threats during our confrontation." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft clicking sound coming from behind a framed print on their living room wall. Marcus approached it cautiously, then quickly removed the picture to reveal a small electronic device attached to the wall. "A listening device," he whispered, showing it to Emily. "Our entire apartment could be bugged." For the next hour, they conducted a thorough sweep of their home, eventually discovering 2 more listening devices, one in their bedroom and another in Marcus's home office. They left the devices in place but began communicating important matters by writing notes to each other, uncertain how long they had been under surveillance. The following morning, Marcus confronted his boss at Anderson and Pike, his suspicions heightened by the discoveries in their apartment. "Did you know that Davenport was my father-in-law when you assigned me to the project?" Marcus demanded as soon as Tom Pike closed his office door. Tom looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? Davenport is your father-in-law." Marcus studied Tom's face carefully, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, he sighed and briefly explained the situation. Christ, Marcus, why didn't you tell me? Tom ran a hand through his thinning hair. That's a massive conflict of interest. The firm could have been compromised. I thought you knew, that maybe you assigned me to the project as some kind of test, Marcus admitted. It seemed too coincidental otherwise. Tom shook his head emphatically. Davenport Enterprises approached us specifically requesting the architect of the Dorchester Community Center. That was you. I had no idea about your personal connection. This new information only deepened the mystery. If Davenport Enterprises had specifically requested Marcus's work, was it possible Richard had known all along who he was requesting? Later that afternoon, Emily sat in her car outside the private hospital, where her mother received regular aesthetic treatments. She had deliberated for hours before deciding to confront Victoria directly, away from her father's influence. As Victoria emerged from the clinic's discreet side entrance, Emily approached her, calling out before her mother could reach her waiting luxury sedan. Mom, Emily said, her voice carrying across the parking lot. We need to talk. Victoria froze, then slowly turned to face her daughter. For a moment, neither woman spoke, the 5-year absence stretching between them like a physical barrier. Emily, Victoria finally acknowledged, her perfectly maintained composure slipping just slightly. This is unexpected. I need to know if you're part of it, Emily said, stepping closer. The threats, the intimidation, the interference with our adoption. Is this what you meant by consequences when I left 5 years ago? Victoria's expression shifted from surprise to confusion. What are you talking about? What threats? Either her mother was an exceptional actress, Emily thought, or she genuinely didn't know about the intimidation campaign. Before she could press further, Victoria's driver appeared, positioning himself protectively beside his employer. Please, Emily said quickly. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Something in Victoria's eyes softened momentarily. Call me tomorrow, she said, handing Emily a business card from her purse. This is my private line. Your father doesn't have access to it. That evening, as Marcus and Emily discussed their respective discoveries, they made a pivotal decision. Despite the risks, they would accept Walter's offer to finance the Horizon Green project independently, while continuing to fight for Noah's adoption. We can't let them win, Emily said firmly. Not after everything we've built together. Marcus nodded, taking her hand. Walter believes in the project, and apparently so does your mother in her own way. We have allies they don't know about. As they prepared for bed, Marcus's phone rang with an unknown number. The police detective's voice was crisp and professional as he introduced himself. Mr. Johnson, we've apprehended the driver of the vehicle that's been following your wife. He's confessed to being hired for surveillance, but claims he received additional orders and payment from someone other than Richard Davenport. Not his initial employer, but someone very close to him. Marcus clutched the phone tightly, his knuckles whitening as the detective's words sank in. Someone close. To Richard, but not Richard himself, he repeated, struggling to process this new revelation. That's what the suspect claims, the detective confirmed. We're still investigating the validity of his statement, but he was quite specific. Says he was originally hired just for surveillance, then received new instructions and a substantial cash payment to escalate the intimidation. After hanging up, Marcus immediately called the hospital where Emily had been taken after the accident. The nurse who answered confirmed that Emily was stable but still unconscious, having sustained a concussion and several lacerations when her car was forced off the road. Visiting hours were over, but they would make an exception given the circumstances. Marcus raced through the hospital corridors 20 minutes later, his heart pounding against his ribs. The antiseptic smell and harsh fluorescent lighting brought back painful memories of his mother's final days, intensifying his anxiety as he searched for Emily's room. When he found it, he stopped abruptly in the doorway, momentarily frozen by the sight before him. Emily lay still against the white sheets, an IV in her arm, and a bandage across her forehead. Her normally vibrant face was pale and bruised, small cuts marking her cheek and jawline where glass had struck her during the crash. Medical monitors beeped steadily beside her, their rhythmic sounds offering the only comfort in the sterile room. "Emily," Marcus whispered, finally approaching the bed. He gently took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "I'm here now. You're going to be okay." The attending physician entered a few minutes later, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Dr. Patel. Your wife is stable, which is the good news. The impact caused a moderate concussion, and she has some lacerations requiring stitches, but no internal bleeding or broken bones." "When will she wake up?" Marcus asked, not taking his eyes off Emily's face. "It's hard to predict exactly," Dr. Patel replied. "The body sometimes needs time to heal. Could be hours, could be tomorrow. The important thing is that her vitals are strong and her brain activity is normal." As the night progressed, Marcus remained by Emily's bedside, alternating between anxious vigilance and making necessary phone calls, to the college about Emily's classes, to their lawyer about the adoption process, and finally to Walter, updating him on the situation. Each conversation reinforced the growing certainty that someone was deliberately trying to destroy their lives. Shortly after dawn, Marcus was startled from a brief, uncomfortable sleep in the visitor's chair by the hospital room door opening. Victoria Davenport stood in the doorway, her normally perfect appearance showing signs of haste. Her hair not quite as precisely styled, her makeup minimal. For a moment, neither spoke, the beeping monitors filling the silence between them. "How is she?" Victoria finally asked, her voice uncharacteristically small as she took a tentative step into the room. Marcus straightened, instantly alert and wary. "Stable, concussion, cuts, bruises. The doctor says she'll likely wake up today." Victoria moved closer to the bed, her eyes fixed on her daughter's face. "I had nothing to do with this," she said quietly. "You have to believe that." "Do I?" Marcus challenged, his exhaustion and worry sharpening his tone. "Because someone tried to kill your daughter, Mrs. Davenport. Not just scare her or threaten her, kill her. And the police say it wasn't Richard who ordered it, but someone close to him." Victoria's face blanched. "You think I would—" She broke off, visibly struggling for composure. "I may have made many mistakes with Emily, but I would never hurt my own child." Before Marcus could respond, a soft groan from the bed captured both their attention. Emily's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened, her gaze unfocused at first. "Marcus," she murmured, her voice raspy. Marcus immediately leaned forward, gently squeezing her hand. "I'm here. You're in the hospital. There was an accident, but you're going to be fine." Emily's eyes shifted, widening slightly when she spotted her mother standing on the other side of the bed. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Victoria hesitated, then carefully sat on the edge of the bed. "When I heard about the accident, I had to come." The police arrived mid-morning to take Emily's statement. She described the black sedan that had followed her from the college parking lot, how it had increasingly pressed closer to her car, and finally how it had deliberately swerved into her lane, forcing her off the road and into a utility pole. "I got a glimpse of the driver," she told the officer, wincing as she shifted position. "White male, maybe 40, crew cut. He was wearing sunglasses, but I remember thinking he looked military. Very rigid posture." After the police left, Walter arrived with news that further complicated their situation. "My sources inside Davenport Enterprises confirm that James Whitaker, the vice president, has been actively working to undermine Richard for years," he explained, keeping his voice low despite the private room. "The investigation into the company's finances has him panicking. He has even more to lose than Richard if certain transactions come to light." "You think Whitaker ordered the car accident?" Marcus asked, connecting the dots. Walter nodded grimly. It fits his pattern. Whitaker has been angling to take control of the company for years. With Richard distracted by your project and the financial investigation, this would be the perfect time to discredit him completely. By making it look like Richard tried to kill his own daughter, Emily realized, her voice hollow. That would destroy him professionally and personally, and conveniently eliminate you both as obstacles to whatever Whitaker has planned, Walter added. Later that afternoon, while Emily slept, Marcus sat in the hospital cafeteria, mechanically consuming a sandwich he couldn't taste while reviewing the documents Walter had provided about Davenport Enterprises' financial situation. The numbers told a grim story. The company was leveraged to the breaking point, with several loans coming due that they couldn't possibly repay without significant new investment. Mr. Johnson? Marcus looked up to find Emily's doctor standing beside his table. My wife. Is something wrong? Dr. Patel shook his head reassuringly. Actually, her latest scan looks good. If she continues improving at this rate, she could be discharged tomorrow. But there is something you should know. He hesitated, glancing around before continuing more quietly. The emergency contact at the college provided us with Mrs. Johnson's medical history, including information about your adoption process. Yes, Marcus prompted, tension creeping back into his shoulders. The stress of the accident and recovery could potentially complicate matters if the adoption agency has concerns about stability. I've seen this before with prospective parents. The doctor's expression was sympathetic. I'd be happy to provide a letter explaining that this was an external trauma, not an ongoing health issue. Marcus thanked him, deeply grateful for the unexpected support, but increasingly worried about Noah's future with them. The adoption was already in jeopardy due to the anonymous concerns filed with the agency. This accident would only add fuel to the fire. Back in Emily's room, he found her awake and sitting up, looking stronger despite the bandages and bruises. The doctor says I might go home tomorrow, she said as he entered. That's great news, Marcus replied, forcing a smile he didn't feel. Walter's arranging for private security at our apartment just to be safe. Emily studied his face, reading the concern he was trying to hide. Tell me what's wrong. Is it Noah? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. I'm worried about how the accident will affect our case, especially with the adoption agency already investigating those anonymous allegations. We'll fight this, Emily said with quiet determination. We've survived everything else thrown at us. We'll survive this too. As evening approached, Marcus received an unexpected text message. Meet me in the hospital chapel. Need to speak privately. V. Telling Emily he was going for coffee, Marcus made his way to the small, non-denominational chapel on the first floor. Victoria was already there, sitting alone in the back pew, staring at a photo she quickly tucked into her purse as he approached. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice subdued in the quiet space. I wanted to speak with you away from Emily. She needs to focus on healing, not family complications. What complications? Marcus asked directly, too exhausted for games. Victoria's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. Richard has been arrested. The police found evidence connecting his accounts to payments made to the driver who followed Emily. But the driver said, I know what he said, Victoria interrupted, and I believe him. Someone is framing Richard. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes rimmed with redness he hadn't noticed earlier. Richard and I have many faults, and we've treated both of you abominably, but he would never harm Emily. Never. Marcus considered her words carefully. If someone is framing Richard, why come to me? Why not go to the police? Because they won't believe me without evidence. And because, Victoria faltered, because I need your help to find who's really responsible. Back in Emily's room, Marcus found his wife sitting up in bed, looking at her phone with an expression of disbelief. What is it? He asked. A news alert, Emily replied, her voice distant. My father's been arrested for allegedly ordering the accident. And there's more. The article mentions possible financial fraud at Davenport Enterprises. Marcus sat on the edge of the Euro bed, sharing what Victoria had told him. As they discussed the implications, Emily's doctor returned with discharge instructions for the following day and a prescription for pain medication. You'll need to take it easy for at least a week, Dr. Patel advised. No work, limited screen time, and definitely no stress if possible. After the doctor left, Emily laughed humorlessly. No stress, right. That night, as Marcus dozed uncomfortably in the hospital chair beside Emily's bed, his phone vibrated with a text from the detective. Driver provided more details. Claims final payment came through a law firm associated with Davenport Enterprises. Meeting tomorrow at station, 10 a.m. The following morning, as Emily prepared for discharge, Marcus received another call from the police. The revelation left him standing frozen in the middle of the hospital corridor, his face draining of color. The investigator's words echoed in his mind. The man confessed to being hired to only frighten your wife, but received explicit orders and additional money from another person. We've confirmed it wasn't Richard Davenport, but someone very close to him. Marcus stood frozen in the hospital corridor, his phone still pressed against his ear, as the detective's revelation echoed in his mind. Someone close to Richard Davenport had escalated the threats against Emily from intimidation to actual harm. Before he could process this information fully, the elevator doors opened, revealing James Whitaker himself, the vice president of Davenport Enterprises. Whitaker stopped short when he saw Marcus, surprise briefly flashing across his carefully composed features before a practiced smile appeared. Mr. Johnson, I heard about your wife's accident. My sympathies. What are you doing here? Marcus demanded, his voice low but intense as he stepped forward. Whitaker's smile didn't waver. Paying a courtesy visit on behalf of the company, of course. Despite recent complications with Richard, Davenport Enterprises values its relationships with partners. Partners? Marcus repeated incredulously. Is that what you call people you try to intimidate and run off the road? A flicker of something, perhaps alarm, crossed Whitaker's face before he regained his composure. I don't know what you're implying, but I assure you. The driver confessed, Marcus interrupted, watching Whitaker's reaction closely. He told police everything, including who paid him extra to escalate from surveillance to assault. Whitaker's carefully maintained facade cracked momentarily. He glanced around the corridor, then leaned closer to Marcus. You have no idea what you're involved in, Johnson. Richard Davenport has been running that company into the ground for years. Some of us are trying to salvage what's left before it all collapses. Before Marcus could respond, 2 uniformed police officers stepped off the adjacent elevator. Upon seeing them, Whitaker straightened and smoothly walked away, calling over his shoulder, Give Emily my best wishes for a speedy recovery. Later that day, Marcus helped Emily into their apartment, now secured with additional locks and a new alarm system installed by Walter's security team. A private nurse Walter had arranged followed them in, carrying Emily's medication and a folder of care instructions. Home, sweet home, Emily murmured, wincing slightly as she lowered herself onto their couch. The bruises on her face had darkened, making her look even more fragile against the cushions. Once the nurse had reviewed the medication schedule and left them alone, Marcus filled Emily in on his encounter with Whitaker and the additional information from the police. So it was Whitaker all along, Emily said, her voice a mixture of relief and confusion. But why? What does he gain by hurting me and framing my father? Control of the company, Marcus explained, showing her the documents Walter had provided. Your father made some questionable financial decisions over the past few years. Whitaker apparently saw an opportunity to push him out completely by making it look like he'd ordered an attack on his own daughter. Emily shook her head slowly, careful of her injuries. The board would force him to resign immediately. No one would trust him again. Exactly. And with the evidence of financial impropriety, he'd likely face criminal charges as well. Marcus sat beside her, taking her hand gently. Walter believes Whitaker has been planning this takeover for at least 2 years. A knock at their door triggered Marcus's newly heightened alertness. Checking the security camera Walter had installed, he was surprised to see Detective Reynolds waiting in the hallway. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," the detective greeted them, declining Marcus's offer of coffee. "I wanted to update you personally on our investigation. We've obtained a warrant to search James Whitaker's office and residence based on the driver's testimony and financial records." "Have you arrested him?" Marcus asked. "Not yet," Reynolds replied. "We're building our case carefully. Mr. Whitaker has considerable resources and connections. But I wanted you to know that we've also found evidence suggesting he was behind the anonymous complaints to your adoption agency." Emily gasped softly. "Can you help us clear that up?" "Noah." "Already handled," the detective assured her with a small smile. "I spoke personally with your caseworker this morning. The complaints have been officially dismissed as fraudulent, and your adoption process is back on track." After the detective left, Emily allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. "Do you think it's really over? The threats, the intimidation?" "With Whitaker under investigation, I think we're safe for now," Marcus replied, though he made a mental note to keep Walter's security team in place a while longer. "We should focus on your recovery and getting ready for Noah." The following morning, Walter arrived with news that sent ripples through their already complicated situation. "James Whitaker has disappeared," he announced gravely. "He emptied his accounts yesterday afternoon and hasn't been seen since." Marcus paced their living room, processing this new development. "So he ran. That's practically an admission of guilt." "Yes, but it also means he can't be compelled to testify about Richard's involvement, or lack thereof, in the company's financial irregularities," Walter pointed out. "The investigation will continue, but without Whitaker to question, it becomes more difficult to separate Richard's actual misconduct from what Whitaker may have orchestrated." Emily, who had been listening from the couch, asked the question they were all considering. "What does this mean for Davenport Enterprises, for the Horizon Green project?" Walter sighed heavily. "The company's stock is plummeting as news of the investigation spreads. Several major investors have already pulled out. Without significant intervention, Davenport Enterprises could face bankruptcy within months." "And our project?" Marcus pressed. "Currently in limbo. The board has frozen all new developments pending the outcome of the investigation." Walter hesitated before adding, "There's more. Victoria Davenport contacted me this morning. She's requesting a meeting with both of you." Emily exchanged a glance with Marcus. "Did she say why?" "Only that it concerns Richard and the future of the company, and potentially your project." Walter's expression remained neutral, but his eyes conveyed caution. "I told her I would ask, but the decision is yours." After careful consideration, they agreed to meet Victoria at a private room in Walter's office building the following day. The neutral location offered both security and discretion, away from prying eyes and potential reporters who had begun circling the Davenport scandal. Victoria arrived precisely on time, her appearance impeccable as always, though Marcus noticed the new lines of strain around her eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said formally as Walter showed her in. Emily, still moving carefully due to her injuries, gestured to a chair. "You said it concerns our father and the company?" Victoria nodded, removing a file from her handbag. "Richard has been released on bail. The evidence against Whitaker was compelling enough to cast reasonable doubt on his involvement in your accident." She paused, visibly struggling with her next words. "However, the financial investigation continues. The evidence of impropriety is substantial. Did he do it? Emily asked directly. The financial fraud? Yes and no, Victoria replied after a moment. Richard made increasingly desperate attempts to keep the company afloat as several major projects failed. He cut corners, moved funds between accounts to cover shortfalls, delayed payments to contractors. Whitaker, as financial director, encouraged these practices while secretly documenting them to use against Richard when the time was right. Marcus leaned forward. Why are you telling us this? What do you want from us? Victoria met his gaze steadily. Richard is prepared to accept responsibility for his financial mismanagement. In exchange for his cooperation with authorities, the prosecutors may consider a reduced sentence. But the company, our legacy, will still collapse, and hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. Unless, Emily prompted, recognizing the implicit proposition. Unless Horizon Green proceeds, Victoria said simply. The project has already generated significant positive press and investor interest. If construction begins immediately, with you, Marcus, as the public face of the development, it could stabilize the company enough to survive the transition. Marcus exchanged a look with Emily, communicating silently as they had learned to do over their years together. We'll need to discuss this privately, he finally said. Victoria nodded, rising to leave. At the door, she turned back. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For everything. The way we treated you both was unforgivable. Her voice caught slightly. I was afraid of losing my daughter to a world I didn't understand. Instead, I lost her to my own prejudice. After Victoria's departure, Emily and Marcus sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, Emily spoke. What do you think? I think, Marcus replied carefully, that 5 years ago, I would have wanted to see Richard Davenport face the full consequences of his actions, both personal and professional. And now, Marcus sighed. Now I'm thinking about the 300 employees who would lose their jobs if Davenport Enterprises fails. I'm thinking about the community that would benefit from Horizon Green. He met Emily's eyes. And I'm thinking about what kind of example we want to set for Noah. The next day, they visited the orphanage, finding renewed joy in spending time with Noah, despite the complications swirling around them. The baby responded enthusiastically to them, gurgling happily in Emily's arms while Marcus made silly faces that elicited contagious belly laughs. The home study passed with flying colors now that those false complaints have been dismissed, the social worker assured them. Barring any unforeseen complications, Noah should be placed with you within the next 2 to 3 weeks. That evening, Marcus and Emily sat on their small balcony, watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in brilliant oranges and pinks. I've been thinking about my father, Emily said quietly. About forgiveness. Marcus took her hand. And? I don't know if I can forgive him yet for what he did to us 5 years ago, she admitted. But watching him lose everything, including his freedom, I'm not sure that's what I want either. So we help save the company? Marcus asked. Work with Walter to restructure it, while your father deals with the legal consequences of his actions? Emily nodded slowly. It's not about saving him. It's about saving something good from this mess. The employees' jobs, the Horizon Green vision, our own integrity. Marcus smiled slightly. When did you become so wise? Probably around the time I decided to leave my parents' mansion with nothing but a small suitcase and the love of an idealistic architect, she replied, returning his smile. The following morning brought news that shifted their plans once again. The federal investigation had expanded, revealing a complex web of financial manipulation that implicated several board members beyond Richard and the fugitive Whitaker. In a surprising development, Victoria Davenport had voluntarily provided evidence that incriminated herself in some of the financial improprieties while clarifying Richard's role. She's trying to protect him, Emily realized as they read the news report together, taking some of the blame herself. Marcus was about to respond when his phone rang. The hospital's number appeared on the screen, sending a jolt of concern through him. As he listened to the voice on the other end, his expression grew increasingly grave. "We need to go," he said urgently as he hung up. Victoria attempted suicide after providing her statement to the investigators. She left a letter confessing that she was the one who vandalized my car with the word inferior 5 years ago. Marcus and Emily raced through the hospital corridors toward the intensive care unit, the revelation about Victoria's suicide attempt and confession hanging heavily between them. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The same hospital where Emily had recently recovered from her own trauma was now treating her mother. "Family for Victoria Davenport?" a nurse asked as they approached the ICU reception desk. "I'm her daughter," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "How is she?" The nurse's expression softened slightly. She stabilized. The doctor pumped her stomach in time, but she's still unconscious. The attending physician will be out shortly to discuss her condition. As they waited, Marcus guided Emily to a nearby seating area, where she collapsed into a chair, her face pale. "I can't believe she tried to kill herself," Emily whispered, staring at her hands. "My mother always seemed so indestructible." The pressure of the investigation, the guilt, the public scrutiny, it must have become too much, Marcus suggested, sitting beside her and taking her hand gently. A doctor in blue scrubs approached them, introducing himself as Dr. Winters. "Mrs. Davenport is stable but still critical," he explained. "She took a significant number of sleeping pills with alcohol, but fortunately her housekeeper found her quickly and called emergency services immediately." "When can we see her?" Emily asked. "She's being moved to a private room in the psychiatric ward once she's conscious and medically stable," Dr. Winters replied. "Given the circumstances, we'll be placing her on a 72-hour psychiatric hold for evaluation." The doctor hesitated, then added, "The police collected a sealed letter addressed to both of you that was found on her bedside table. They've cleared it as evidence and left it with the head nurse." After collecting the letter, Emily and Marcus found a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria. Emily held the cream-colored envelope in trembling hands, her mother's elegant handwriting spelling out both their names on the front. "Do you want me to read it first?" Marcus offered. Emily shook her head, carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of the expensive stationery Victoria had always preferred. Taking a deep breath, Emily began reading aloud in a low voice. "Emily and Marcus, by the time you read this, I will have attempted to remove myself from a situation I can no longer bear. The public disgrace, Richard's legal troubles, the destruction of everything we built, these I could perhaps endure. What I cannot live with is the knowledge that my own prejudice and pride cost me my only daughter. The night you left our home, it was I who went out to the driveway and scratched that hateful word on Marcus's car. Richard knew nothing about it. My rage and fear at losing you, Emily, to a world I refused to understand, led me to commit an act so beneath me, so contrary to the values I claim to uphold, that I have never been able to confess it. Until now. The investigators have my full statement regarding the company's finances. I was complicit in much of what occurred, often encouraging Richard to take shortcuts I knew were improper. The truth will come out regardless, but perhaps my cooperation will help mitigate the consequences for the employees who bear no responsibility for our actions. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I want you both to know that I have followed Marcus's career from afar, collecting every article and photograph of his work. In another life, one where I was not blinded by prejudice, I would have been proud to call him my son-in-law. Victoria. Emily folded the letter carefully, tears streaming silently down her face. All these years, she whispered, I thought my father was the one who vandalized your car. I never suspected my mother. Marcus sat quietly, processing Victoria's confession. The woman who had looked at him with thinly veiled disdain across a dinner table 5 years ago had been secretly following his career, collecting evidence of his success. The contradiction was difficult to reconcile. 2 hours later, they were permitted a brief visit to Victoria's room in the psychiatric ward. She lay pale against the white hospital sheets, an IV in her arm, and monitoring equipment surrounding her bed. Her eyes fluttered open as they entered, widening slightly in surprise. "You came," she said weakly, her voice raspy from the stomach-pumping procedure. Emily moved to her mother's bedside, taking her hand cautiously. "We read your letter." Victoria closed her eyes briefly, tears escaping from beneath her lids. "I'm so ashamed," she whispered. "Why did you do it?" Marcus asked, standing at the foot of the bed. "The car, I mean. Why that word specifically?" Victoria's gaze shifted to Marcus, meeting his eyes directly. "Because I was terrified," she admitted. "Not just of losing Emily, but of a world changing faster than I could accept. My entire identity was built around a certain social position, a certain order to things." She paused, swallowing painfully. That word was the ugliest thing I could think of, the most hurtful. It represented everything I feared, the breaking down of barriers I had relied on to define my place in the world. The brutal honesty of her answer caught Marcus off guard. For years he had imagined Richard as the villain of their story, but Victoria's confession revealed a more complex reality, prejudice born of fear rather than hatred, though no less destructive for its source. Later that afternoon, Marcus stepped out to take a call from Walter, leaving Emily alone with her mother for the first time in 5 years. "I thought I was protecting you," Victoria said softly, as Emily adjusted her pillows. "From a harder life, from judgment, from disappointment. Instead, I was only protecting my own narrow world view." Emily studied her mother's face, the familiar features now marked by age and strain she hadn't noticed before. "Did you ever try to find me, after that first year?" Victoria nodded slightly. "I hired a private investigator, just to make sure you were safe, not to interfere. When he reported that you were teaching at Emerson, and that Marcus's career was flourishing, I felt relieved, and then ashamed of my relief, as if I had expected you to fail without us." "And the articles about Marcus's work?" Emily prompted. A faint smile touched Victoria's lips. "At first I collected them to reassure myself that you hadn't made a terrible mistake. Then, gradually, I began to appreciate his talent on its own merits. His vision is extraordinary." Outside in the corridor, Marcus ended his call with Walter, who had updated him on the latest developments at Davenport Enterprises. The board had called an emergency meeting, temporarily appointing Walter as interim CEO due to his financial expertise and lack of involvement in the accounting irregularities. The company remained in critical condition, but Walter believed the Horizon Green project could still be salvaged if they acted quickly. As Marcus prepared to return to Victoria's room, a text message from Detective Reynolds appeared on his phone. "Meeting with federal agents tomorrow, 10 a.m. Important new information about Davenport case. Your presence requested." The following morning, Marcus met with Detective Reynolds and 2 federal agents in a conference room at the Boston FBI field office. The information they shared confirmed Walter's suspicions. James Whitaker had indeed been orchestrating financial manipulation at Davenport Enterprises for years, gradually positioning himself to take control of the company once Richard was removed. "We've traced offshore accounts containing nearly $30 million siphoned from company projects," Agent Morales explained, sliding a folder across the table to Marcus. Whitaker was the primary architect of the fraud, though Richard Davenport and others participated to varying degrees, often unaware of the full scope. "What does this mean for Richard legally?" Marcus asked, scanning the documents. "He'll still face charges," Detective Reynolds replied. "But with Whitaker identified as the mastermind and Victoria's cooperation, His sentence could be significantly reduced, possibly even probation with restitution, depending on the judge. Back at their apartment, Marcus shared the news with Emily, who had remained home to rest and recover from the emotional toll of the previous day's revelations. "So, my father might avoid prison?" she asked, curled on their couch with a mug of tea. Marcus nodded, sitting beside her. "But the company's future is still precarious. Walter believes our best chance is to move forward with Horizon Green immediately, with a complete restructuring of Davenport Enterprises focused on sustainable development rather than luxury properties." Emily considered this carefully. "And our role would be what exactly?" "Walter proposes that I serve as design director for the restructured company, with you potentially joining the new board to represent community interests given your academic background," Marcus explained. "He's suggesting a complete rebranding, possibly even a new company name to distance it from the scandal." "And my father," Emily pressed, "would have no operational role, though he might retain some ownership as part of a settlement with authorities." Marcus hesitated before adding, "It's your decision, Emily. This is your family's company. We can walk away entirely if that's what you want." Emily was quiet for a long moment, staring out their window at the Boston skyline. 5 years ago, I walked away from that family and that privilege without hesitation because they couldn't accept us together. Now they want our help to save what's left." She turned to face Marcus. "What do you think we should do?" "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that we have an opportunity to transform something built on exclusion and privilege into something that could genuinely benefit the community. But it would mean working with people who hurt us deeply, including your father." The next day, they visited the Federal Detention Center, where Richard Davenport was being held pending his arraignment. The man who greeted them in the visitation room bore little resemblance to the imposing figure Marcus remembered from that fateful dinner. Richard's custom suits had been replaced by standard-issue detention center clothing, his confident bearing diminished by confinement and disgrace. "Emily," he said, his voice catching slightly as his daughter entered. When his gaze shifted to Marcus, a complex mix of emotions crossed his face: resentment, shame, and something that might have been grudging respect. "Marcus, I didn't expect both of you to come. We need to talk about the future of Davenport Enterprises," Marcus stated directly, taking a seat across from Richard. "And about what role, if any, you envision for yourself in that future." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Walter called. He said you're considering his restructuring proposal." "We're considering it," Emily confirmed. "But we have conditions." "Such as?" Richard asked cautiously. Emily leaned forward, her expression resolute. "Complete transparency going forward, a new corporate governance structure with community representatives on the board, and your participation in a comprehensive program addressing racial bias and privilege as part of any settlement agreement with authorities." Richard stared at his daughter, clearly taken aback by her directness. After a long moment, he shifted his gaze to Marcus. "And you? What are your conditions?" Marcus met his father-in-law's eyes steadily. "Just one. That you acknowledge, publicly and privately, that your prejudice nearly cost you not only your company and freedom, but something far more valuable, your family." As they left the detention center, an agent approached them in the parking lot. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Agent Cooper with the FBI. May I have a word?" The agent glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "We've discovered something concerning. It appears Richard Davenport attempted to transfer substantial assets to your name just before his arrest, a move that could implicate you in his financial dealings." Marcus froze, the agent's words hitting him like a physical blow. "Assets transferred to my name? That's impossible. I never authorized any such transfers." Agent Cooper nodded solemnly. "We believe it was done without your knowledge or consent, possibly as an attempt to shield assets from seizure or to implicate you if the investigation got too close to Mr. Davenport. Emily grabbed Marcus's arm, her face pale. That's absurd. Why would my father try to frame Marcus after everything that's happened? We're still determining the motivation, Agent Cooper replied. But I wanted to warn you directly. Our financial forensics team is tracking the transfers now. We don't believe you're involved, Mr. Johnson, but you'll need to cooperate fully as we untangle this. During the drive home, Marcus and Emily sat in tense silence, the new revelation adding yet another layer of complexity to their already complicated situation. The prospect of being implicated in Richard's financial misdeeds felt like a cruel twist in a story that had already contained too many betrayals. I can't believe he would do this, Emily finally said, staring out the passenger window at the passing city. After everything, to try to use you as some kind of fall guy? Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly. We don't know that was his intention. Maybe he thought he was helping us somehow, in his own twisted way. By secretly transferring assets that could make you look guilty of financial fraud? Emily's voice rose in frustration. That's not help, Marcus. That's sabotage. The following morning, they received a call from Victoria's doctor, informing them that she was physically stable enough for discharge, but would be transferred to a private psychiatric facility for continued treatment. The doctor requested their presence to discuss Victoria's ongoing care plan. At the hospital, they found Victoria sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed in clothes the housekeeper had brought her, looking fragile, but more alert than during their previous visit. When she saw them enter, her eyes filled with tears. You came back, she said softly, genuine surprise in her voice. Emily approached her mother cautiously. Of course we did. You're still my mother despite everything. Dr. Winters joined them, shortly thereafter, outlining the treatment plan for Victoria. A minimum 2-week stay at an exclusive psychiatric facility specializing in depression and trauma recovery, followed by ongoing therapy. Throughout the doctor's explanation, Victoria remained quiet, her hands folded in her lap, occasionally glancing at Emily and Marcus as if to gauge their reactions. Mrs. Davenport will need a strong support system when she eventually returns home, Dr. Winters concluded, looking meaningfully at Emily. Family involvement is crucial to her recovery. After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't deserve your concern. After what I did, what I've been. Why did you do it, Mom? Emily asked directly. The suicide attempt. Was it just because of the investigation, or was it something more? Victoria's eyes met her daughter's, then shifted to Marcus before returning to her hands. When I provided my statement to the investigators, I had to confront everything, not just the financial improprieties, but the kind of person I've been. Seeing it all laid bare, she paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't bear the weight of it anymore. The person in those statements wasn't someone I wanted to be, yet it was undeniably me. Marcus stepped closer to the bed. The letter you left mentioned that you've been following my career. A faint blush colored Victoria's pale cheeks. At first, I told myself I was just keeping tabs on Emily through you, but then I found myself genuinely impressed by your work. The Dorchester Community Center especially, the way you integrated natural light and communal spaces. She stopped abruptly, seeming embarrassed by her enthusiasm. I suppose I was trying to understand what Emily saw in you, beyond what I had prejudged. What I discovered was humbling. You never reached out, Emily noted, a question implicit in her statement. Victoria shook her head sadly. Pride, fear, shame. Take your pick. Each time I considered it, I remembered that dinner, the things we said, what I did to Marcus's car. How do you come back from that level of cruelty? It seemed better to admire from afar than to risk rejection I knew I deserved. As they prepared to leave Victoria in the care of the hospital staff, who would transfer her to the psychiatric facility, she reached for Emily's hand. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly, "about your father's attempt to transfer assets to Marcus. It was my idea originally, not to implicate him, but to protect you both if everything collapsed. I thought if some of our wealth could be salvaged for you." She trailed off, seeing the shock on their faces. "Richard took the idea and implemented it without consulting me on the details. I never intended it to create legal problems for Marcus." That evening, Marcus received a call from Walter with news that shifted the landscape once again. James Whitaker had been apprehended in Montreal attempting to board a flight to Paris. His capture meant that authorities now had the principal architect of the financial fraud, potentially reducing the legal jeopardy for both Richard and the company itself. "The board is meeting tomorrow morning," Walter explained. "With Whitaker in custody and expected to cooperate to reduce his own sentence, there's cautious optimism about salvaging the company. Your presence would be beneficial, Marcus." The following day, Marcus arrived at Davenport Enterprises headquarters, now buzzing with nervous energy as employees tried to continue working amid the swirling uncertainty about the company's future. Walter met him in the lobby, looking exhausted but determined in his role as interim CEO. "The board is assembling now," Walter said, guiding Marcus toward the elevator. "I've prepared a presentation on the restructuring proposal centered around Horizon Green, but they'll want to hear directly from you about the vision." In the boardroom, where just weeks earlier Marcus had first confronted Richard Davenport, a subdued group of executives now awaited his arrival. Several familiar faces were missing, board members who had resigned or been removed due to their involvement in the financial improprieties. Those who remained looked at Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "Gentlemen, ladies," Walter began, nodding to those assembled, "you've all reviewed the restructuring proposal. I've asked Mr. Johnson to join us today to discuss how Horizon Green could serve as the cornerstone of a new direction for the company." Marcus stepped forward, aware of the weight of the moment. 5 years ago, he had been dismissed by Richard Davenport as an opportunist. Now he stood before the remains of Davenport's board, offering a vision that might save what was left of the company. Horizon Green was designed as more than just a building project, Marcus began, his voice steady and confident. "It represents a philosophy of development that balances profit with social responsibility and environmental stewardship. The question before you isn't just whether this project can succeed financially, though I believe it will, but whether it can serve as the foundation for a new corporate identity." For the next hour, Marcus outlined his expanded vision, transforming Davenport Enterprises from a developer of exclusive luxury properties into a leader in sustainable, inclusive urban development. He proposed a complete rebranding, new corporate governance structures with community representation, and a flagship project that would showcase their commitment to change. "The irony isn't lost on me," Marcus concluded, "that I'm standing here proposing to help save a company whose founder once believed I wasn't good enough for his daughter. But this isn't about the past. It's about what we build from here." After the board unanimously approved the restructuring plan, Walter pulled Marcus aside. "There's one more piece of business today," he said quietly. "The district attorney's office has offered Richard a plea deal based on Whitaker's capture and Victoria's cooperation. Minimum security for 18 months, followed by probation, community service, and restitution." Marcus nodded slowly. "Has he accepted it?" "He wants to meet with you first," Walter replied. "He's being held at the federal courthouse for a hearing this afternoon. There's a private conference room available if you're willing to see him." At the courthouse, Marcus was escorted to a small room where Richard Davenport waited, handcuffed, but composed. The two men regarded each other in silence for a moment before Richard spoke. "Walter tells me the board approved your plan," he said, his tone carefully neutral. They did, Marcus confirmed. The company will be restructured and rebranded, with Horizon Green as the flagship project. Richard nodded slowly. And my role? No operational involvement, Marcus stated firmly. But you'll retain a minority ownership stake as part of your settlement with authorities, provided you agree to certain conditions. Your conditions, I presume? Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Marcus sat down across from his father-in-law. Participation in a comprehensive program addressing racial bias and privilege, as Emily mentioned earlier. Public acknowledgement of the company's past failures, both ethical and financial. And he paused, weighing his next words carefully. A genuine attempt to reconcile with your daughter, not through manipulation or grand gestures, but through honest effort to understand and respect her choices. Richard was silent for a long moment, studying Marcus with an unreadable expression. Finally, he asked, "Why are you doing this? After everything, you could have walked away, let the company collapse. It would have been understandable, even justified." "Because I'm not interested in revenge," Marcus replied simply. 5 years ago, I promised myself I would prove my worth not by destroying what you built, but by building something better myself. Now, I have that chance. And ironically, it involves transforming your company into something that might actually benefit the community. As Marcus prepared to leave, Richard called out, "The asset transfers, they weren't meant to implicate you. It was a misguided attempt to ensure Emily would be provided for if everything fell apart." Marcus paused at the door. "Actions have consequences, Richard. That's something we both understand now." 10 years later, a crowd gathered on the sprawling central lawn of the completed Horizon Green complex for its official dedication ceremony. The innovative development had transformed a once-neglected area of Boston into a vibrant community where residents of various income levels lived in sustainably designed buildings surrounding parks, community gardens, and shared public spaces. The project had won international awards for its architecture and social impact, becoming a model for urban development across the country. On the stage erected for the occasion, Marcus stood with Emily, now a respected professor and community advocate, and their 10-year-old son Noah, a bright, curious boy who had his father's thoughtful expression and his mother's determined spirit. Beside them, looking older but remarkably transformed, were Richard and Victoria Davenport. When it came time for Richard to speak, he approached the microphone with a humility that would have been unimaginable a decade earlier. 10 years ago, he began, my prejudice and arrogance nearly destroyed not only a business legacy, but something far more precious, my family. Today, I stand before you to publicly acknowledge how wrong I was, and to express my profound gratitude to my son-in-law, Marcus Johnson, who found it in his heart not to seek vengeance, but to create something extraordinary from the ashes of my failures. Richard's words resonated across the gathering as Marcus stood beside him, witnessing a transformation that had taken 10 years to complete. The afternoon sun bathed the Horizon Green complex in golden light, highlighting the innovative architecture that seamlessly blended nature with urban living. Marcus's vision made manifest in glass, sustainable materials, and flourishing green spaces. "What my father-in-law isn't mentioning," Marcus said as he stepped up to the microphone, "is that this transformation wasn't just architectural, it was personal. The journey that brought us here today involved painful reckonings, difficult truths, and ultimately the courage to change, not just buildings but hearts and minds." The audience, a diverse gathering of residents, investors, city officials, and journalists, listened attentively as Marcus continued his speech, occasionally gesturing toward the sprawling complex behind him. Horizon Green had become more than just another development. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when social consciousness guided design and investment. Emily watched her husband with pride, Noah fidgeting slightly beside her in his formal clothes. At 10 years old, their son had grown into a thoughtful, curious boy who inherited Marcus's eye for design and Emily's passion for literature. Despite the complex circumstances of his adoption, or perhaps because of them, Noah had become the heart of their family, bridging generational divides that once seemed insurmountable. Victoria sat with perfect posture beside Emily, her hand occasionally reaching over to steady Noah when his restlessness threatened to get the better of him. The decade had softened her edges, though she maintained the elegant appearance that had always been her armor. The difference now was in her eyes, the rigid pride replaced by a humility born of hard-won self-awareness. As the ceremony concluded, guests dispersed to tour the various elements of the complex: the mixed-income residences, community gardens, educational facilities, and innovation spaces that formed the heart of Horizon Green. Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers and journalists eager for quotes about the project's success and influence on urban development across the country. "Your design philosophy has redefined what sustainable urban communities can achieve," commented one architecture critic, notepad in hand. "How much of this vision came from your personal experiences?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "All of it," he finally answered. "Horizon Green isn't just about creating beautiful, functional spaces. It's about breaking down barriers between different income levels, between humans and nature, between past and future. Those principles came directly from navigating barriers in my own life." Across the courtyard, Emily engaged with a group of educators discussing the complex's integrated learning center, which provided after-school programs and adult education to residents and the surrounding community. Noah had slipped away from the formal conversations to explore the interactive water feature that served as both art installation and practical demonstration of rainwater harvesting. Richard Davenport, now 72, moved somewhat stiffly among the guests, his silver hair catching the late afternoon light. The 18 months he had served in minimum security prison had left their mark, not physically, but fundamentally, in how he carried himself, how he spoke, how he listened. The racial bias and privilege awareness program that had been a condition of his plea deal had evolved from obligation to genuine commitment, with Richard eventually becoming an unlikely advocate for corporate diversity and inclusion. "Quite a change from the Davenport luxury developments of old," remarked Walter, now in his 70s, but still sharp as ever, as he joined Richard near the central pavilion. Richard nodded, surveying the lively community space. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd accepted Marcus from the beginning. How much pain could have been avoided. And how much growth might never have occurred," Walter countered with the wisdom of one who had observed the entire saga unfold. "Some transformations require fire." As evening approached, the formal reception transitioned to a community celebration with food trucks, local musicians, and activities for residents of all ages. Marcus found Emily near the butterfly garden, where she stood watching Noah interact with other children from the complex. 10 years, she said softly, as Marcus slipped his arm around her waist. "Sometimes it feels like that night at my parents' house was in another lifetime." Marcus followed her gaze to where Victoria was now sitting on a bench, engaging in animated conversation with Noah and several other children. "In many ways, it was another lifetime, for all of us." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by Noah, who came bounding over with excitement. "Dad, Grandma says there's going to be fireworks later, and she gave me this." He proudly displayed a small architectural sketching kit. "She says it's because I told her I want to design buildings like you when I grow up." Marcus exchanged a look with Emily, both remembering how unimaginable such a scene would have been a decade earlier, Victoria embracing her role as grandmother to their adopted son, encouraging his interest in Marcus's profession. As darkness fell, the residents and guests gathered on the central lawn, where comfortable seating had been arranged for viewing the commemorative fireworks display. Marcus and Emily found themselves seated with Richard and Victoria, Noah nestled between his grandparents with unself-conscious ease. "I never properly thanked you," Richard said quietly to Marcus as the first colorful bursts illuminated the sky. "Not just for saving the company, but for giving me a chance to know my grandson, to be part of your family despite everything." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight behind Richard's words. 10 years ago, when we were deciding whether to help restructure Davenport Enterprises, Emily said something I've never forgotten. She said it wasn't about saving you, but about salvaging something good from the situation. The employees' jobs, the vision for Horizon Green, our own integrity. She always was the wisest among us, Richard acknowledged, glancing fondly at his daughter. After the fireworks concluded, most guests began dispersing to their homes or hotels. The Johnson family, along with Richard and Victoria, retreated to Marcus and Emily's residence, a thoughtfully designed townhouse within the complex itself. As they settled in the living room, Noah asked the question that had been forming in his mind throughout the evening. If Grandpa Richard didn't like Dad at first, why does he have so many pictures of him now? Noah's innocent curiosity cut through the adult conversation, causing an awkward pause. Richard's face flushed slightly with embarrassment, but then he surprised everyone by reaching for his wallet. Opening it, he carefully removed several folded photographs, which he handed to Noah. "These aren't just pictures of your father," Richard explained as Noah examined them curiously. "They're photographs of his buildings, each one representing a piece of his vision come to life. I carry them because they remind me of an important lesson." "What lesson?" Noah asked. Richard glanced at Marcus before answering. "That sometimes the things and people we're quickest to dismiss are exactly what we need most in our lives." Later that night, after Noah had been tucked into bed and Richard and Victoria had retired to the guest suite, Marcus and Emily stood on their private balcony, overlooking the illuminated pathways and gardens of Horizon Green. The city skyline glittered in the distance, a constant reminder of the world beyond their carefully crafted community. "Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choices," Emily mused, leaning against the railing. "Working with my father after everything he did, helping rebuild the company instead of letting it collapse." Marcus stood beside her, their shoulders touching in comfortable familiarity. "Would you change anything if you could go back?" Emily considered the question seriously. "No," she finally decided. "The company that bears our name now creates housing that helps people, employs hundreds with fair wages and benefits, and sets industry standards for sustainability. My father served his time and genuinely changed. My mother found peace and purpose. And most importantly, we have Noah and each other." Marcus nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as a cool evening breeze rustled through the nearby trees. "I think that's what we discovered through all of this, that the true value of love isn't measured in grand gestures or easy forgiveness. It's in the hard work of building something that lasts, something that makes the world better than we found it." Emily turned in his embrace to face him, the years only enhancing the connection that had begun when they defied her parents a decade earlier. It was worth it, wasn't it? All the pain, all the struggle, all the waiting. It was worth it to get here. Marcus smiled, drawing her closer. "Worth everything," he agreed softly. "Every moment that brought us to this place." Below them, the pathways of Horizon Green curved through carefully tended gardens and communal spaces, connecting diverse residents in a community that embodied Marcus's vision of integration and sustainability. In the guest suite, Richard Davenport sat on the edge of the bed, looking at one last photograph he hadn't shown the others, a picture of Marcus, Emily, and Noah, taken at Noah's adoption finalization ceremony, their faces alight with the joy of becoming a family. And in the bedroom down the hall, Noah slept peacefully, surrounded by drawings of buildings he hoped to design someday, unaware of how his existence had helped heal wounds that once seemed unhealable. The complex that had begun as a dream then became a symbol of conflict, and finally emerged as a monument to reconciliation, continued its quiet life around them. A testament to what could be built when love, rather than fear or prejudice, formed the foundation.